Hello, how are you guys? I switched up my location today because I have a neighbor who's always in the window and it makes me feel like I'm being watched. So I've been hanging out in that area of the house a little bit less lately. It's probably fine, but I'm going to be on the couch now. And this is the blanket that my mom crocheted for me for my birthday this year. I'm on page 376, one paragraph in. While studying the state government for the Reconstruction Commission in 1919, Moses had learned about unappropriated state lands. A century before, to help tide the country over a time of financial uneasiness, the federal government had made loans to the states which in turn loaned the money to individuals who pledged farms or other smaller pieces of property in cities as security. Some loans had not been repaid, and the states thereupon foreclosed. In most instances, the New York State Legislature later passed bills allowing the municipalities in which the land was located to appropriate it. But not, Moses had learned, in every instance. Some of the properties involved had seemed too small to bother about in an era in which property was measured in acres rather than feet. And as time passed, these pieces of land had simply been forgotten about and had remained unappropriated. Now, Moses sent men from Albany to look up such pieces, and they found several in areas of Brooklyn that were now slums. The city could not afford to buy them so hastily, since the legislature was shortly due to adjourn for the year. He drafted and got passed bills turning this land over to New York City. I need a sip of my coffee in my Transit Museum mug. Later today, I'm going to, I don't know if you knew this, but I'm writing a book about Wikipedia, and I've kind of just been doing it without really supervision for so long, maybe for at least 6 months. I feel like it's been most of my days, that's the primary thing I do all day. And I'm going to the publisher's office with the editor to get coffee today. And part of me is kind of nervous because I'm like, oh no, what if I find out that I've been wasting my time, or that I feel like I write for a lot of time every day, but I frequently don't write that many words. And it takes me a really long time to get something that feels like even a complete thought or polished. So I'm also like, oh no, what if he's disappointed in me for not having enough done, even though I'm trying. So that's what I'm doing later today. Sorry for dumping my anxieties here. Also, it's public, so maybe he'll see this, but that's fine. Hi, Mike. I'll probably tell him that exact same thing during the meeting. One day, Sid Shapiro can recall the moment Moses suddenly remembered that in 1922, I'm imagining a sudden realization, the State Division of Canals had filled in a swampland near the Gowanus Canal in Red Hook to provide a foundation for a grain near the Gowanus Canal. To provide a foundation for a grain elevator that was building there. And he seemed to recall, he said, that there had been some land left over. An investigation proved that he was right. There had, in fact, been 11 acres left over. He had a bill passed in Albany allowing the state to give the land to the city for recreational purposes. On another occasion, chatting with aides, Moses suddenly asked, wasn't there some kind of fund set up about 15 years ago for a war memorial that was never built? How is he just remembering this stuff? There was indeed. In 1918, a public subscription had been held to finance construction of $1 million World War Memorial Arch. But the subscription raised only $210,000, and the drive sponsors, already squabbling over which borough the arch should be located in, were unable to agree on details of a smaller memorial, and in 1922 turned the money over to the city chamberlain's office for safekeeping until the dispute was resolved. It never was. And during the intervening 12 years, the sponsoring committee stopped meeting, and the existence of the money, which Chamberlain had deposited in banks, was all but forgotten. And when Adolf Burrell, the appointed Chamberlain by LaGuardia, looked for it at Moses's request, he found that accumulating interest had swelled it to $338,395. Zooey mama. The people who had contributed the money had intended it to be used for a war memorial. But Moses persuaded Burrell that the definition of war memorial could be extended to mean war memorial playgrounds. And he persuaded the surviving members of the sponsoring committee not to oppose the use of the money for this purpose. A persuasion made easier by Moses' agreement that each playground would contain one bronze plaque honoring the memory of World War veterans, and that there would be at least one playground in each borough. With the money, Moses purchased in congested areas of the city 8 pieces of property big enough for playgrounds. Do you guys like my pillow? It says Wikimedia Die Free Encyclopedia. I don't really have a good German accent, but this is German. I got it from I visited Berlin 2 years ago. It was so fun, by the way. Highly recommend. And I got to go to the office. And Wikimedia Deutschland has so much money. So they have a bunch of fun little, they have like beach chairs in the office with the Wikipedia logo. They have swings. It definitely feels like you're in a tech office. Anyway. He seemed to see opportunities everywhere. While being chauffeured around Harlem, he noticed 2 tennis courts belonging to a Roman Catholic church on 138th Street. Telling his chauffeur to stop, he jumped out of the car, ran into the church, found the pastor, and asked if the courts were much used. When the pastor said no, they weren't, Moses asked him to give them to the city for a playground. And when the pastor told him that such a gift could be arranged only through Cardinal Hayes' office, Moses sent a representative to see a representative. Moses sent a representative to see a representative of the cardinal, and the gift was arranged. Noticing a 2-acre vacant lot on 11th Avenue between 59th and 60th Streets, he learned it was owned by the Consolidated Gas Company, which had no present plans for using it, and he persuaded the company to give him a temporary permit to put a playground on the site. In Middle Queens, the dreary belt of cemeteries, small single-family homes, and shabby little factories sprawling northeast from the oily waters of Newton Creek, there was still one large vacant tract. 127 acres, formerly owned by a murdered gambler, Arnold Rothstein. This is fun. We don't have a lot of murder in this book. Learning that Rothstein's estate owed the city $334,000 in back taxes, Moses asked surrogate James Delahanty if the city could buy the property if it forgave the back taxes and paid $68,000, the difference between the taxes and the assessed valuation. Delahanty agreed, but LaGuardia was not able to find even $68,000 that the city could spare. Moses recalled that there was usually several $100,000 kept in a special emergency account on one of the more obscure sinking funds. City attorneys informed him that legal restrictions prohibited the expenditure of any of this money on genuine emergencies. Moses informed them that if they restudied the law, they could find that there was one exception. Money could be removed from the fund temporarily for first instance appropriations to be repaid out of the next city budget for a single specific purpose, the purchase of undeveloped real estate. So convenient. But LaGuardia, while agreeing that the acquisition of 127 acres for $68,000 was an unprecedented bargain, was afraid to obligate the city even for that amount. So Moses returned to surrogate Delahanty and worked out another arrangement under which the city bought 74 of the 127 acres for $334,000 but the estate paid the $334,000 back to the city to clear the tax deficiency on all 127 acres, leaving the estate with 53 acres free and clear, and the city with a 74-acre Juniper Valley Park, which it had acquired without a cent of cash outlay. Have any of you been to Juniper Valley Park? Because now I want to go, knowing that it was the former land of a murdered gambler. That seems fun. Moses' charm was as powerful a weapon as his mind. Turning it on John D. Rockefeller Jr., Moses persuaded the billionaire to donate several other pieces of land to the city. He persuaded his old benefactor, August Heckscher, to donate a playground in Central Park. Also, the honking is crazy right now. I have no idea what's going on, but Pearl's really she's kind of standing guard by the window. Honk City over here for sure. August Heckscher, I remember him because he was the one. Remember when they needed money really badly, but they couldn't let anyone know they needed money, and so Belle Moskowitz was like, Moses, I know one person you can call, and we can't ask around because then everyone's gonna know that we need money. And she was like, we can call August, and then they described him as a wee little man, and when he sat on chairs, his legs would dangle, but then he gave them the money. Remember? Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I'm gonna go check out. Let's check out the scene. This is very exciting. It's kind of what you would expect. It's just cars. It's just a lot of cars lined up. Well, that was exciting. What do you think, Pearl? What do you think about the traffic? Sorry for the little interruption. I bet there are people in the comments that are. I don't do this because, I know that this isn't that watcher friendly, because I stop all the time and I don't have great sound or anything, and I blab about random things. But tell me if I should actually cut down on interruptions, if I should try at all, and then I will if you want. When he discovered a well-to-do family with philanthropic leanings but insufficient resources to buy and equip a playground completely, he bought it together with another family in similar circumstances, as he did to give the city the Dreyer Offerman Playground in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Learning that a small charitable foundation was unable to meet mortgage payments on a piece of property in Queens, and it was planning to let it go to the bank by default, Moses appeared before its board of trustees, several of whom were directors of the bank, and talked to them so movingly about the need of slum children for recreation that they agreed to use the foundation's few remaining assets to pay off the small balance remaining on the mortgage, and default instead on the taxes, so that the city could take it over rather than the bank. As soon as Moses had his hands on the title to these pieces of land, he filled them with workmen. By July, the 8 war memorial playgrounds had been finished. By Labor Day, there were 52 others, including the Christie Forsyth Street complex, which was really a park, but which was dubbed the finest playground in the United States. In a city which in its entire history had managed to build 119 playgrounds, it saw its stock of that item increase by 50% in a single year. The city cheered. Its 13 daily newspapers, however divergent their philosophy, united in heaping wreaths of adjectives on his head. The new commissioner was dynamic and brilliant in the ultra-conservative Sun, able and enterprising in the ultra-liberal World Telegram, tireless, fearless, and incorruptible in the sometimes conservative, sometimes liberal Hearst Evening Journal. Headline writers, using topical catchphrases, talked of Moses' New Deal for parks and the amazing accomplishments of Moses' first 100 days. Editorial writers were even more poetic, Robert Moses has made an urban desert bloom, said an editorial in the World Telegram. The Herald Tribune, formerly recanting the heresies of which it admitted it had been guilty during the Long Island controversy, dubbed him the Hercules of the parks. And the Times said, big block quote coming up, brace yourself. January 19 of this year was a red-letter day in the history of New York. The time, the place, and the man met in Mayor LaGuardia's appointment of Robert Moses as park commissioner on that date. Measured in park progress and development on the scale to which this city has been accustomed, it seems years ago. The achievements, tangible as well as intangible, of the new commissioner in his first few months of office seem little short of miraculous. It is almost as if Mr. Moses has rubbed a lamp or murmured some incantation over an old jar and actually made the genie leap to do his bidding. Reporters fought for interviews with him, and when they got them, for he gave them freely, the interviews were very friendly. Murray Davis of the World Telegram telling readers that for 10 years he's been working long hours without pay to give New Yorkers inexpensive outdoor pleasures, added, big block quote coming up again, to the suggestion that he was independently wealthy and was giving hard work and time to an unremunerative job, he smiled. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I'm 45 now. Ever since I was a kid, I was interested in government. My fancy led me into parks and playgrounds, and I have nourished those fancies as a hobby. Avocation, take your pick. The fact remains that I enjoy this work more than any other, so why not stay with it? I have had only 2 public offices that paid salaries. Now I have my third. It pays, I don't know, what do commissioners get? $13,000? I don't know. I'm satisfied to make just a bare living if I can realize all my plans for these things I enjoy. I'm interested in cutting down the overhead and getting results, not in pay. During 1934, Moses was in the New York papers even more than J. Edgar Hoover, who spent the year compiling a highly publicized elite hierarchy of public enemies and then shooting down number 1 on the list, John Dillinger, in a blaze of gunfire. Moses is in the New York State papers almost as much as LaGuardia. The Times editorial on Moses, for example, was one of 29 praising him in that single newspaper that year. And the Times also carried 346 separate articles on his activities, an average of almost 1 per day. And then there's a footnote. The Times Index lists them not only under his name, but under New York City Parks Department of, under the names of the individual parks and under the other listings given in the index. Wow. Okay. I mean, so sorry. I'm just like thinking about this from a Robert Caro perspective, but he really probably spent, just for the sentence of how many times in 1934 there were papers about him, he probably had to spend like at least a morning combing through all the sources just to get the number 346. Anyway, there were days, in fact, on which there were 5 separate stories in the Times. So many were carried on the split page, the first page of the second section, devoted in the early 1930s largely to municipal affairs, that there were whole weeks in which this prominent page of the nation's most respected newspaper read like a park department press release. There were Sundays on which 6 separate newspapers were carrying long, uncritically laudatory interviews with Moses, or reviews of his accomplishments. His picture stared out from their pages 100 times during that year. Each park opening brought forth a new volley of praise. After one, the Herald Tribune, under a headline proclaiming, "The people own the parks," called the event just another one of those triumphs whereby Mr. Moses has almost convinced the public that it really owns the parks. After the long night of Tammany, it is an idea difficult to grasp. The cheers of the press were echoed by the public. While the parks were blossoming with flowers, editorial pages were blossoming with letters from the public praising the man who had planted them. And it was not unusual at park and playground opening ceremonies for children, prodded by their parents to break into the cheer. Oh, listen to this. You are not ready for this. 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate? Mr. Moses, Mr. Moses, Mr. Moses. The cheers rose to a crescendo when the Central Park Zoo reopened on December 3, 1934. I wish Robert Caro had put some choreo in here. I could have done a whole cheer routine. Okay, there's the zoo opening. This is really fun. Moses had a personal reason for being interested in the zoo. 1934 had been a sad year for Al Smith. The public humiliation to which Jimmy Walker had subjected him at the Inner Circle dinner was only one indication of the fact that there was no longer any place for the old leader in the organization he had led and loved. Only 60 years old, as vigorous as ever, Smith wanted desperately to play a role in the federal government's efforts to end the human misery caused by the Depression. No man was better qualified. Roosevelt himself had told Francis Perkins, "Practically all the things we've done in the federal government are like things Al Smith did as governor of New York." Roosevelt had asked Smith to campaign for him against Hoover, and Smith had done so. And when Roosevelt had won, Smith had told acquaintances flatly that a man did not feud with the president of his country. He gave him loyalty. He only hoped, he said, that Roosevelt would allow him to work for him. But Roosevelt, another young man of whom Smith had been fond of and whom he had helped up the political ladder, refused to even consider him for any federal post. And if Smith considered this the ultimate humiliation, he learned during 1934 that it was not. Worse was yet to come. He pooped his pants. Just kidding. When John J. Raskob and the other businessmen who controlled the Empire State Building Corporation had offered him its presidency, he had told them that the post was honorary. But with the skyscraper completed, the Depression made it so difficult to obtain tenants that the corporation was on the verge of bankruptcy, and they told him he would have to do something to earn his $50,000 a year. He would have to go to Washington and beg Roosevelt to throw some government leases his way. For months, Smith refused. But he was finally persuaded that loyalty to his friends required him to help him. Roosevelt responded generously to his entreaty. Federal agencies were moved out of offices as far away as Philadelphia to fill up the New York skyscraper. But now in the late afternoons, when Moses dropped by to see him, he would often find the man who had been called the Happy Warrior sitting, staring out the windows of his apartment with new lines of bitterness and disillusionment hardening on his face. Moses knew how much the old governor loved animals. And oh, thank God we're talking about the Executive Mansion Wildcats again. Moses knew how much the old governor loved animals, and he knew he missed the little zoo he had maintained behind the Executive Mansion in Albany. I bet some readers probably forgot about that, but I didn't. I actually didn't forget at all. The former governor and Katie now lived at 820 Fifth Avenue, almost directly across from the menagerie, and Smith spent a lot of time strolling among the cages, feeding and talking to the animals. Saddened by the unsanitary conditions in which they had to live and the lack of care for their physical ailments, Smith was horrified when he learned that in case of fire, the animals might be shot. That's such a... Oh no, I can't believe they wrote that down as their fire plan. When Moses was appointed park commissioner, Smith told him that he would regard it a special favor if the menagerie were improved. Moses gave the job top priority. When materials and equipment ran low because of the CWA's reluctance to spend money on them, they were always running low. What was available was diverted there from other projects. The best ramrods were put on the job to drive the 1,000 men working around the clock in the fenced-off area behind the arsenal. Most of the animals had been moved out, but not all, and the lions, shunted from one animal house to another as the buildings were torn down and kept awake by the glow of the carbide flares and the pound of the pneumatic drills roared through the night. While a reporter who visited the site early one morning found the old polar bear pacing restlessly up and down in bewilderment, pausing occasionally to peer out at the grainy torchlit laborers. Oh man, I'm really savoring all the mentions of the animals. It's crazy. It's so sad. Poor little polar bear is probably like having a nightmare. The residents of Fifth Avenue apartment buildings near the site roared too, but Moses refused even to listen to their complaints. Often in the evenings, he would suddenly materialize on the scene, joking with the field superintendents and with the men, encouraging them, telling them how important their work was, urging them on. All summer and fall, he spurred the job with a special urgency. And when it was finished on December 2, he turned the reopening into a surprise party for Al Smith. It was quite a party. Some observers said New York had never seen anything like it. To emphasize that he was trying to make the zoo not so much a great animal museum like its counterpart in the Bronx, but a place to delight for young children, Moses had already dubbed it a picture book zoo. And when the 1,200 invited guests filled into the stands set up in front of the arsenal for the opening ceremonies, 25,000 other persons lined Fifth Avenue waiting to be admitted. They found that in front of the zoo entrance had been erected a 6-foot-high wooden replica of an open picture book, with painted green elephants charging across its bright yellow pages. Flanking the speaker's platform were 2 huge boxes wrapped in striped and polka-dotted paper and adorned with satin bows like a child's present. As the ceremonies began, 4 olive-clad trumpeters blew a flourish. The wrapping paper was pulled away, and inside one box was a cage containing a lion. Inside the other was a cage with a gorilla. Public Welfare Commissioner William Hodson, called to the microphone to give a speech, startled the audience by breaking instead into several choruses delivered in a rather wheezy tenor of, "Oh, I went to the animal fair." Thousands of balloons were released at intervals to fill the air with color until they were wafted northward by the prevailing breeze. Uniformed, flag-bearing high school bands and elementary school fife and drum corps came marching, and one after the other up Fifth Avenue. And clattering around the corner of the arsenal came a team of white ponies drawing a tiny colored barouche in which sat a little girl holding a large gold key with which LaGuardia could unlock a door in the middle of the picture book and thus officially open the new zoo. This is so much better than lining up to dig a hole if you are a kid. But before LaGuardia got the key, there was something for Smith. Moses had given the former governor no hint that he would even participate in the ceremonies, simply telling him that there would be a seat for him on the reviewing stand. But when the old warrior walked out the front door of his apartment house to make way to the stand, he found 300 school children from the 4th Ward lined up in front of the door, cheering and waving balloons, waiting to escort him across Fifth Avenue. He found that his seat was in the place of honor next to LaGuardia. Moses, who had been supposed to sit on his other side, was absent. During the past week, he had refused to take a day off despite a severe case of influenza, and doctors summoned over his protests a worried Mary just 2 hours before the ceremony began, found him in a state of complete collapse, and ordered him to bed. How did he know that? I wonder if that was in the newspapers or if he just had to ask Robert Caro. Hardly had Smith sat down when he realized that he was being summoned to the microphone himself. And Earl Andrews, substituting for Moses, pinned to his lapel a large, elaborately engraved medal with a lion's head on his face, and announced that he was now, and permanently, honorary night superintendent of the Central Park Zoo. As Andrews finished speaking, a horse-drawn wagon, reminiscent of those Smith had chased through the Fourth Ward in his youth, rolled around the corner of the Arsenal, and it was jammed with boys from the Fourth Ward singing East Side, West Side. That must be the Sidewalks of New York song, which is his classic song. East side, west side. That's about all I know. The horses pulled up in front of him, and 11-year-old Eddie McKeon jumped up and presented him with a large Christmas turkey as the whole reviewing stand stood and joined in his old campaign song. The old governor's eyes were tearing. I think I'm going to stop there probably. I hope you have a good Monday. I'm getting so, look at us. We're getting so close to halfway. Yes. Yes. Page 382. That's pretty good. At this pace, I don't even know when I'll finish. I don't want to think about it. Yeah, you're right. It's kind of interesting that he did all of that. But I don't know if it was kind or if there was some ulterior motive that we're just not seeing. Hard to know. Anyway, see you later.